So, thank you so much for having me. I do have a little problem with the way this was scheduled. How can anyone follow James Surls? My God, I can't believe there's a person left in the room. I just want to go in under a tree and think for a little while after listening to him. And this is not the first time I've had to follow the great Master James Surls either. It's always very difficult. But my goal, I'm just a little boy from Mississippi living in New Orleans, and they invite me here to talk about Texas art to this room full of Texas art scholars. I don't know what they were thinking. So I'm just going to do something very selfish here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to familiarize this room with our collection at the Ogden Museum of Southern Art, and to give you an idea of where we're looking and how we're collecting Texas art, and to familiarize you with our collection, the depth and breadth of our collection, so that when you go out looking for loans, or when you're thinking about what to do with that $1 million that you're going to leave somewhere, you can think of the Ogden Museum as a Texas art institution, because in many ways we are. The mission of the Ogden Museum of Southern Art is to broaden the knowledge, understanding, interpretation, and appreciation of the visual arts and cultures of the American South through its events, permanent collections, changing exhibitions, educational programs, publications, and research. A little history on the museum. The Ogden Museum was kind of conceptualized in 1999. We opened with a little gallery on Julia Street in downtown New Orleans, where we started a capital campaign to build Gold Ring Hall. And Gold Ring Hall is right across from the number one reason people come to the city of New Orleans right now, which is the World War II Museum, the National World War II Museum. So we're right across the street. We've got some heavy competition, obviously. But once you've kind of tried to digest that museum, which takes about 3 days, and you want to see some art, you can walk across the street to the Ogden Museum, to Gold Ring Hall. We have 5 floors. 4 of them are devoted exclusively to exhibition space. And a little bit about our name. Our founding donor is Roger Houston Ogden. And Roger was born in Denver, raised in Lafayette, Louisiana, so kind of either side of Texas there. But made his career, was educated and made his career in New Orleans. And he started, when he was in college, he had a girlfriend that drug him to an art gallery. It was not something he wanted to do, and he got really bored really quick listening to this panel discussion. So he got up to stretch his legs and look around at the gallery, and ran across a work on paper by the artist John Drisdale, New Orleans artist, and fell completely in love, was just mesmerized. And he went home that night to his dorm room at LSU and was just thinking, how am I going to get that piece of art? Where am I going to put it? I live in the dorm, But so he had an idea, Mom's birthday. And so he goes to his dad and he says, Dad, I got a great idea for Mom's birthday. Let me take you somewhere and show it to you. And they pull up into an art gallery, and his dad said, oh, no, we're not art people. We don't buy art. You might as well turn this car around. He said, well, just give it a chance. Come in and look. And they ended up buying the piece for his mother. And it was such a huge success that they bought her a piece of art for Christmas and for her birthday and for Easter and anniversaries or whatever. And until finally she said, enough, I've got enough art. But by that point, Roger had caught the bug. As New Orleans Ida Kohlmeyer said, collecting is the disease for which I hope to never be cured of. And so he started building a collection, first starting in Louisiana and then spreading out across the South, until finally he had a collection that he realized was just too important for one family to hold. And so he started thinking about a museum. And that came together in 1999. The museum was founded with an initial donation of over 600 works by Roger Houston Ogden. And we've grown that collection with 0 acquisitions budget, I might add. We've grown that collection to over 4,000 works of art. And while Texas Texas looms large on the map of the American South, Texas looms even larger, I believe, in the history of art in the American South. And so we have a large focus of Texas art in our collection, and Roger himself is continuing to this day to collect Texas art in a big way. So when I talk about the Ogden collection for the rest of this PowerPoint, it's going to be a combination of Roger's private holdings, which are slated for the museum, and the permanent collection of the Ogden Museum. I'm just going to lump them all in together for our purposes today. You'll see the difference on the slides themselves, but I may not differentiate it as I talk. To reiterate that we're actively involved in the Texas art scene over in New Orleans. Here we have a party recently at the Ogden Museum of Southern Art where we were honoring the great John Alexander in the background, Bill Goldring, who's one of our major patrons and board members, myself, John Alexander, the great Sharon Kopriva, James Surls, and the great Charmaine Locke here. And I just love this picture, that's why I put it in there. See, I'm a member of the club, right? So one of our visions for the future of the Ogden Museum of Southern Art is to get our historic building turned into exhibition space. Right now, we have connected the two buildings, the contemporary building and the historic building, with a connecting corridor. And eventually, this will work like the National Gallery is how we envision it. So we'll have the historic, the 19th century, earliest 20th century collection in the historic H.H. Richardson Library, and modern and contemporary in the contemporary building of Goldring Hall. Now, a little background on this library. H.H. Richardson is kind of the holy grail of architecture in the Northeast. He has several buildings on Harvard's campus. He built the state capitol in Albany, New York. But what people don't realize is H.H. Richardson was born and raised in New Orleans. And although he never saw this building completed in his hometown, it was completed shortly after his death and opened to the public in 1889. It is a Richardsonian Romanesque building. We're about to start a capital campaign. It's about $12 million. If anybody in this room can make this happen tomorrow, we can get it done. But we're going to get this building opened, and that will trigger a second donation of historic works from Roger's collection for this building. So a little bit about our collection, 19th century in Texas. The earliest piece in the collection is Theodore Gentilz. And this is, a New Orleans collection. Of course, we're going to start it with a bunch of drunks, right? So Los Barachitos, 1865, the drunks, egg tempera on panel, and this beautiful, 8 by 9 inch candy maker scene. I believe this is going to be in an upcoming exhibition here in Texas. So, because we just got it photographed right before this slideshow for a publication. Another artist that I was unfamiliar with until encountering Roger's collection is Rudolf I don't even know how to pronounce his name, Kronow, I believe. What is it? Kronow. Prussian-born painter and illustrator. He was trained at the Royal Academy in Dusseldorf before taking a job in the U.S. in 1881. He was a friend of Sitting Bull, speaking of Chief Sayat. Traveled to Texas and the West and published 8 books, mostly in Germany, and mostly about the American West. He lived primarily in D.C., but here we have this beautiful pen and ink, black and white wash and gouache on board, a ranch on the Rio Brazos, Texas from 1885. The next piece you may have seen come to auction, and everybody was curious who got it, and Roger got it. Richard Lentz, Trinity River Bottom near Dallas, 1886. Dallas's first professional painter, another Prussian-born artist, I should say. He was a member of the Munich School before arriving in Dallas, but to become that city's first professional artist. In 1884 to 1886, he was an art instructor at the Dallas Academy of Art, and in 1887, he traded a similar painting, a view of Dallas from Oak Cliff, for the residential lot that he lived in Oak Cliff. So he traded a painting for his home. And the success of his studio at that time led to the first fine arts exhibition at the State Fair of Texas in 1887. And here we have Robert Jenkins' Onderdonk, a portrait of Julian Onderdonk in pen and ink from 1892. I don't have to tell you who this is, obviously. But I've found, and maybe you can clear this up for me, but I found there's 2 artists that are known as the Dean of Texas Artists. But this one is the first one that I know of. It's known as the Dean of Texas Artists because he wasn't he wasn't necessarily prolific. He spent more time teaching, so he had a huge influence as a teacher in the Texas art scene. And as we learned yesterday in Michael Grauer's brilliant talk on Salinas, not only was he a father of Julian Onderdonk, but also Eleanor, who was an important early Texas curator. So that leads us into Texas Impressionism and the so-called Bluebonnet School. So I'm going to show a focus of a few of our Onderdonks, Julian Onderdonks. And Julian is also often called the father of Texas painting, or the Bluebonnet painter. But born in 1882, he studied under William Merritt Chase, and here we see a painting likely executed just prior to his return to Texas in 1909. And these slides just don't do justice to these paintings, as you all know. To stand in front of this is to really understand the brilliance of a young Julian Onderdonk. And this is not a potboiler seascape. This is actually a really lovely seascape. And it's one of the finest seascapes in our collection, I think, and it's from around 1908, also very young. And here we see Onderdonk, in his prime, with his iconic imagery of the bluebonnet fields. This is bluebonnets in Huisac at twilight, about 1920, well, it is 1920 and 21. This is actually signed and dated, but this is a large painting, and I don't currently have this in the museum. It's hanging in Roger's den, but not for long, because it's a stunner. And another subject near and dear to that school of painters is the cactus field, and this is a large, beautiful cactus field. Probably my second favorite cactus field in our collection, after C.C. Pancoast. And of course, Bluebonnet Scene with Girl. But I think this is Julian Onderdonk at his absolute best. The light, I've seen a lot of Onderdonks, and the light in this piece, that golden hour, that magic hour, that soft filtered light is unlike any other Onderdonk I've ever seen. And the fact that there's this figure in the middle of the piece and those tire tracks through the field. I mean, it's just a spectacular painting. And if you come to the Ogden, it's always on the wall. So another painter from that period is Eloise Polk McGill of Independence, Texas. She also studied under William Merritt Chase and under Robert Jenkins Onderdonk. Cockfight San Antonio, subject we just discussed with Mr. Surls there, but it's a beautiful small impressionist painting. And this is the only example of this artist we have in the collection. And of course, the giant in the room, Frank Ray. We have about 7 Frank Rays. This is my favorite because it's just so iconic of the landscape and the Texas longhorn in the field there. But it's tiny. It's 7x3, one of the field sketches, but a real beauty. Robert Wood along the Babcock Road, British born American artist, and he made a huge impact on the Bluebonnet School in the 1930s. But I think what led to his huge popularity, from what I can tell, is not only his great mastery of the surface and of the subject, but also the very large print editions. Very large print editions that got into every household in America, making him almost an early pop star of the American art world. And I was enlightened and thrilled to hear also in the lecture about Salinas yesterday of his influence on that artist, and I had never been made aware. So this takes on new significance to me within the collection, and it's a real beauty, bringing that English voice to Texas Impressionism. November, E.G. Eisenlohr, 1916. Student of both Robert Onderdonk and Frank Ray. He was probably the most important artist to Dallas, documenting the early rise of that city in the early part of the 20th century, with over 1,000 depictions of Dallas as it was becoming a major American city. People don't really talk much about Eisenlohr in my circles these days. I'm sure they do in this room. But he won top prizes across the state in the 30s and 40s and has a vast list of museum collections and exhibition history. And this is another piece that rarely leaves the walls of the Ogden. This is a really bad image, and I apologize. It's the best I had in preparing for this slideshow. But this is our one and only Jose Arpa. And, he's possibly one of the most influential painters of Impressionism in the first part of the 20th century. And he brings this truly Spanish voice to Texas. It was, surprisingly, a scene that was dominated by German and French Impressionism. But although I mainly see landscape paintings by Arpa, here we see Arpa depicting characters of a truly Spanish novel, Don Quixote of La Mancha by Cervantes. He painted 46 oil paintings based on the characters of Don Quixote. And this is, of course, Sancho Panza from about 1910. Paul Schumann, sailboats on Galveston Bay. Speaking of Germans, here we have another German artist that immigrated to America, settling in Galveston in about 1881. And a little hurricane, you might have heard of it, destroyed his studio in 1900. And if there was any doubt to his dedication of the Gulf Coast landscape, he stayed, he remained, he rebuilt, and he continued to focus on the Texas coast, the Texas Gulf Coast. He's a master knife painter, and this piece is just so luminous when you see it in person. And it's not necessarily a small one. It's 20 inches wide. Dawson Watson. We have 7 or 8 Dawson Watsons in the collection. And he was another British-born American artist, member of the Impressionist colony in Giverny. And he made major contributions, obviously, to the San Antonio scene, but he's most famous, I think, in the history books for winning the largest cash prize in American art in the time in 1927 for the Texas Competitive Wildflower Competition. I think they divided that competition into 2 sections. It was people from Texas and then people from outside of Texas. He won for people outside of Texas at the time, and his close friend Arpa won for the person within Texas. We have about 7 pieces. They're all phenomenal, but for some reason this one, its diminutive size is just stunning to me, and that he can do so much with so little. To take such a grand subject as the Grand Canyon and accomplish that within 3 by 4 inches is just amazing. So this is my favorite Dawson Watson in the collection. Now, one of the painters in the collection is Salinas. And this is our only Salinas. I sent Roger and a couple other collectors a few images from the art fair out there, so maybe we'll get another Salinas soon. But this is a beauty. It's a really beautiful Salinas from about 1937. Clara Caffrey Pancoast. I've only included 1 image here. We only have 2 paintings. But C.C. Pancoast is one of my favorite painters in the collection, the 2 paintings that we have. One is a cactus field in bloom that is just amazing. But because I didn't have a mission in this whole slideshow, and we have this amazing large mission, included this piece. She was also a Louisiana artist. She was born in Lafayette and married and moved to San Antonio and made a career as a journalist mainly. She was a Sunday painter. She worked on the weekends, but she was also a student of Jose Arpa, and many say his prize student. And I think it's clear that she was quite the accomplished painter. Well, here we are in Austin. This is Barton Creek, Austin, Texas, about 1933, by John Elliott Jenkins. Jenkins studied in Paris at the Académie Julienne and reportedly studied under Claude Monet. He lived in Amarillo, Houston, and predominantly in Austin. And that moves us into our regionalist, modernist collection and the move towards abstraction. I'm going to start this piece with not necessarily the picture of high modernism in Texas art, but I'm starting this section with this piece because this woman was so influential, I think, in the rise of modernism in Texas art, from what I can tell. She arrived in Houston in 1896. She helped found the MFA Houston, and she taught for over 60 years in Houston. She studied all over. I mean, she really had an education that was the best that could be offered. And she studied in New York and in Egypt and in Paris. She painted in Giverny as well. She was a member of the Society Anonyme with Man Ray and Duchamp. And then, she worked in many styles, ranging from Cubist to Impressionism to Modernism. And the one piece in our collection is this floral still life that's just luminous and stunning, but not the picture of high modernism that we'll come to see in Texas later. But here we have Fred Darge, Tack House, 1935. I think of Darge as a painter that exists in that liminal space between regionalism and Western landscape tradition. He was really focused on the disappearing way of life in Texas, the ranch life and the ranch hands. And this is just the way he captures light. It's a really stunning piece from 1935. Kathleen Blackshear, I'm going to say this right now. Please tell me if you have a great Kathleen Blackshear. I want to know more. I want to see more of her work because this is a stunning piece in our collection. It's a really important piece in our collection, not only to the history of Texas art, but to the history of American art, I think, and to our collection in particular. Because here's Kathleen Blackshear, born in Navasota, Texas, went to Baylor, studied at the Art Students League, and then on to the Art Institute of Chicago, where she taught for almost 40 years. And the thing about Kathleen Blackshear, she grew up in the cotton fields, and befriended the families of black cotton field workers in her area, and were friends with their children. And when she goes to Chicago, that became very important to her, those memories, those relationships she had with black families in Texas. And so she was one of the first arts educators in the United States to drag her students out of the classrooms into private collections of African art and Asian art, and to teach non-Western art on the same level as Western art traditions to her students. She was an advocate for opening up that program to women and people of color, and she was a mentor to several black students at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, including Margaret Taylor Burroughs, but most importantly to our purposes at the Ogden, Benny Andrews. Benny Andrews, an artist who's becoming increasingly more important in American art history, and an artist who we have over 250 works by Benny Andrews. And it was not only involved in opening the museum, but in the very inception of our mission. So when Benny Andrews couldn't go to school because it was segregated, he couldn't study under Lamar Dodd at the University of Georgia, it was because of the efforts of this lesbian from Texas, Kathleen Blackshear, to open up the School of the Art Institute of Chicago for him to attend. He went to Korea and got the GI Bill, and then was able to attend a major American art school. So Kathleen Blackshear, not only a great regionalist painter, I think, but also an important educator and activist in the world of art in America. So we're going to focus a little bit on Edmund Kinzinger, another German. He's born in 1888, and he was highly trained from the Munich school. He spent nearly 5 years on the front during World War I, and then here comes World War II. So fleeing Nazi Germany, he came to the U.S. He'd already been in the U.S. several times, a visiting professor, and he became the chair of the art department at Baylor University from 1935 to 1948. So here we start with a piece prior to his time in Texas, music, still life motif. But then here's 1936, Edmund of the Mexican family. This is a recent acquisition to the collection, to Roger's collection, and it's absolutely beautiful. I can't wait to get it on the walls. And then my dear friend Tashko woman, who hardly never leaves our regionalist galleries, because it's just such a stunner. And this is also a bad image. I apologize. It's the best I could come up with on short notice. But he would spend summers, or he spent at least one summer in Tashko, and it became subject matter for years to follow from his sketches there. Seymour Fogel, who I'm going to talk a little bit more about when we get into another section, but he situates himself right now into this slideshow right here. But in 1932, Seymour Fogel served as apprentice to Diego Rivera, while Diego Rivera was working on the Rockefeller Center murals in New York City. And they became friends, and Diego taught him how to create large-scale murals. And shortly after that, he began a series of large murals that he received commissions for through the Works Progress Administration, through the Federal Arts Project. And to accomplish those commissions around the United States, he would hop freight trains and ride around the U.S. And while he was riding around the U.S. on the freight trains, he was documenting folks who had been affected by the Great Depression with these beautiful sketches. And this is one of those sketches from 1934, Working. And it's one of my favorite regionalist pieces, social realism. It's one of my favorite pieces in the collection because also I'm very interested in how Southern art is influenced by the art of Mexico. A lot of that comes through Texas, a lot of that comes through Louisiana. But this is a very direct correlation of an artist who was inspired by the Mexican muralists, Diego Rivera in particular, and then bringing those ideas back to Texas. Wayman Adams, here we have an outsider coming in to look at Texas. He studied under William Merritt Chase as well. He was from Indiana originally, and he's primarily known for painting famous people. He was the portrait painter for America at the time, painted everyone. And he was also called Lightning Adams, because he could paint so fast. He could usually do a completed portrait in one sitting under 3 hours. So from 49 to 59, he was here in Austin, Texas, and this is from 1950, Cowboy Gallagher Ranch. We also have another very large, I did not have an image of it yet because it just came back from the conservator, but we have a very large Wayman Adams of mariachis that's stunning. So the Dallas Nine. With the Dallas Nine, I'm going to look at the Dallas Nine, but the Dallas Nine is actually the Dallas 9, 10, 12, 14. I can't figure it out. Maybe you can make that clear to me. But this is not one of the original Dallas Nine. This is a person that's associated with the Dallas Nine, Charles Bowling. He began painting late in life, around 1935, and he studied under Olin Travis and Alexander Hogue. He was closely associated with the Dallas Nine, especially Otis Dozier and William Lester, who I think he had a career as a draftsman, and he had a professional career outside of art. And when Otis Dozier and William Lester were both kind of suffering from the Depression, he got them some drafting gigs. Ed Bearden, another person closely associated with the Dallas Nine, born and died in Dallas, born in 1918, died in 1980. And he studied under Jerry Bywaters and Otis Dozier. He was the founding director of the Dallas Museum for Contemporary Art. He's mostly known for his portraits of actors on the set of the film Giant, the James Dean film shot in Marfa. But this predates that, 1942, Old John, charcoal on paper. Perry Nichols a little later than the Dallas Nine period, but a beautiful small piece that I've shown several times, San Sabo Ranch. He's one of the original Dallas Nine, a beautiful painter as well as muralist and printmaker. And then we're going to focus on Florence McClung, one of my favorite of the group, although she was not an original Dallas Nine artist. In that original exhibition, she's closely tied to them. Studied under Frank Ray, studied under Olin Travis, studied under Alexander Hogue. And we have several works in the collection. This is an early cactus still life. One of my favorite paintings in the entire collection, Cypress Swamp, Caddo Lake. And of course, Caddo Lake being that kind of borderland between Texas and Louisiana, it has a special significance to our collecting of Texas art. and a very recent acquisition, the Triple Underpass, 1945.
You want back?
I figured somebody would say that. You can borrow it. So, this is important for many reasons. One, it's one of the best painting sheet that Florence McClung ever created. And also, that was the first triple underpass in America. Beautiful Art Deco, and this really what this was about was this engineering feat, this triple underpass of Dallas, this rising city in American history, or in American life. In the background, you can see the book depository. And of course, this painting took on new significance because it was the site of the Kennedy assassination in 1963. I actually haven't laid eyes on this physically yet, so I'm just as excited to see it on the wall of a museum as you are. William Lester, 1945. You can never appreciate a William Lester from a slide. There's this dry quality to the paint that is just, and layered quality of the paint that is just stunning to me. This piece, I think, situates itself right on the border of regionalist realism and abstract expressionism because the paint quality, the focus on the surface is so fine. It had been in the vault for a long time. We had not hung it in quite a while, and then the Astros were headed to the World Series. So I said, well, I got to pull out the catcher. And it did not go unnoticed. There was a lot of commentary in the galleries about this Texas artist painting of baseball. So, he was an original Dallas 9 painter, another student of Olin Travis, taught at UT Austin from 1942 to 1972. I'm only going to show this one slide, but within our collection of Otis Dozier, you can trace his move from regionalist, realist style all the way into that kind of semi-figurative abstraction that he was known for towards the end of his life. One of the pieces that I'm most excited about, because we have an Otis Dozier sow, a white sow. It's a lot of fun, but I'm kind of tired of looking at that pig every time I hang the galleries with Texas Regionalism, and Roger just acquired this. Sun Over the Yucca Rocks, 1963. And I think it's just a stunning, stunning painter. Original member of the Dallas 9, a student of Frank Ray. He's mainly known for that tight regionalist style, and some of his best works are definitely there. But I think this is a stunning, a really beautiful move towards abstraction with these highly charged colors, these broad swaths of colors, and that kind of loose brushwork, and of course the iconic yucca. Everett spruce. We have about 7 spruces in the collection. This is by far my favorite, The Lost Boat, 1945, that kind of dark expressionism, that kind of dark expressionism that he did so well. We're going to focus a little bit on DeForest Judd. He was a student of Dozier, teacher at SMU, and in this collection we see Judd moving from this high modernism in red boats, which is not a small painting, 24 by 30. Fence, Cathedral Mountain. I just had this hanging for over a year at the museum, and it just glows. It just glows with this interior luminosity. And Yucca, 1963. Large painting, 36 by 48. And finally, Cross Terlingua with Blue Sky, 1981. So, Fort Worth Circle. We don't have an encyclopedic collection of the Fort Worth Circle, but we do have this stunning Cynthia Brantz. I recently curated an exhibition at the museum called The Whole Drum Will Sound, Women in Southern Abstraction, and included this work, and it was an unexpected highlight of the exhibition. Everyone was asking, there was actually more people asking me about the Cynthia Brantz than the Dorothy Hood. That was included in that exhibition. So this is, I love it because it blends this kind of, this iconic theme from Texas art, the horse and rider, with this movement towards modernism, cubism, abstract expressionism. You know, in 1948, I heard this great story that Cynthia Brantz visited Europe for the first time, and she met Kopriva, and she met George Brock, and George Brock made a huge impact on her. And in her travel journals, well, she bought a book, and it was very expensive. And in her travel journals from that trip, she said she'd rather have 2 such books than a French dress any day. And I think that says a lot about her devotion to modernism. And this was a piece that, you know, when you work in a museum and you have large holdings, some of those pieces just sit in the back and you don't pay much attention to them. They're the kind of quiet person in the corner that you haven't noticed. And then you pull that rack out and you start looking and you start conversing with a painting. And this is one of those paintings. I overlooked this painting in the vault for years. And then one day I pulled it out and started really looking at it. And the conversation just got deeper and deeper. And it's a really, really stunning painting, so we're proud to have it. David Brownlow, knife painter, accomplished knife painter, prolific knife painter, and a member of the Fort Worth Circle. And I believe David Brownlow was self-taught. I haven't found that he studied under any painters at the time. He read a lot of books, looked at a lot of paintings, and just taught himself how to work with that palette knife. And this is a fairly large, 4-foot wide Brownlow abstract. And Bror Utter, who was grandson of a Finnish artist, and attended the Fort Worth School of Art and was very much involved in the Fort Worth Circle. And then Kelly Fearing, who was one of the last members associated with the Fort Worth Circle, she went on to teach at UT Austin, which would then change the history of modernism, abstract expressionism, and just move the conversation forward in Texas with what was coming out of UT Austin at the time. You know, at UT Austin, you have Everett Spruce, William Lester, Seymour Fogel, Constance Forsythe. And I know in conversations with Roger, he's really paying a lot of attention to that period, that moment of innovation and movement into the future in Texas art. So he's collecting pretty heavily from what happened in Austin at that time. So I said we would get back to Seymour Fogel, and we're going to do a little focus on Seymour Fogel. Seymour Fogel was a New Yorker that came to Texas. He studied at the Art Students League. He studied at the National Academy of Design. As we mentioned earlier, he apprenticed under Diego Rivera and did murals for the WPA around the country. And he worked from social realism, regionalism, through modernism into abstract expressionism, and you can see that all within the Ogden's collection. In 1946, he moved to Austin and taught at UT Austin until 1959. This is a New Orleans subject matter from 1938, New Orleans ladies, a real gem. And then kind of this high Mad Men era abstraction that he did so well. We have 2 examples from that period. They're very large, 50 by 34, and Pagan Forms, 36 by 24. And then this kind of dark color field abstraction, Vision from 1956. Abstraction 1960, that's a work on paper that just vibrates. And my personal favorite, Bridge from 1961. This is wrong. That is not masonite, that is canvas. It's not 109 inches of masonite. That would be a problem. That's canvas, but it is a stunner, and I'm about to hang it at the museum. So if you come in about a month, you'll be able to view this in our main lobby. Is it Pruser or Presser? I always say Presser. Pruser. All right. That's why I'm here. Let's find out. Pruser was born in 1919. And he studied at the New Bauhaus under Moholy Nagy. He taught at the Glassell School, the University of Houston, Harvard, and MIT for 31 years. But what I find beautiful about this piece is, during World War II, he painted camouflage with the Army's 84th Engineer Camouflage Battalion. And so he's flying over the landscape of Europe and Northern Africa and viewing that topography from the air, and then painting camouflage. And then he comes back. And this piece is, right after he gets back to the United States. He's in 1948. And you can see that influence not only of what was happening in American art at the time. It's not heavily Kandinsky inspired, but also that camouflage. And this is another piece that you just can't appreciate it unless you're standing in front of that paint. The way he incised and scratched through the surface, and the way it just glows internally. It's one of my favorite paintings, one of my probably top 10 paintings in the entire Ogden collection, is this Prusser. Michael Frary, California native. He was faculty chair at the McNay Museum from 1949 to 1952, and he taught at UT Austin from the mid-50s through 1986. John Lockwood, University of Kansas, Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, and studied in Paris. Was a WPA artist working in the 30s in the Regionalist style, best known for his work in Taos. But in 1938, he began as a UT Austin professor, art professor, and was, from what I understand, was instrumental in the hiring of these great teachers in Austin. He quickly left and went down to Florida and is mainly known as a Florida artist now, but we have one example of this artist in our collection. And this is another one of these gems in the collection, a work that I overlooked for many years until when I did look at it, I couldn't stop looking at it. Ben Colwell. He worked on this surface for 12 years, and you can see all 12 years when you start looking at the surface. He gouged into it, he pulled out areas with tape to expose underpaintings. It's signed in all four corners, so you can hang it any damn way you want. But San Antonio native, lived in Houston and Dallas as a child, studied at Columbia University, and I think he could have been a huge name in the abstract expressionist movement, but his father didn't want him to be an artist. And his father said he needed to come back to Texas and have a career in business, which he had a good career in business. I think he made a lot of money. And he lived in Dallas. But he made these during World War II. He was in the Pacific Theater. I think he arrived in Pearl Harbor right after Pearl Harbor. And he created these kind of sketches of war that led to a solo museum at the Dallas Museum, a solo exhibition at the Dallas Museum, and then inclusion in the the Museum of Modern Art's 1946 show, 14 Americans. So he was a contender. He really could have been huge, but he moved back to Dallas. And I'll just stop for a minute and talk about that a little bit. That's part of our mission at the Ogden Museum is, I don't think anybody wants the Ogden Museum to be the museum of Cy Twombly and Robert Rauschenberg and Jasper Johns, Southerners that made it big, Southerners that left for New York. The Ogden Museum's mission, especially during this period, is to celebrate those that stayed, that were tied to place, that were tied to the community, and never got their shot to make it big, even though they were creating amazing work in rural Mississippi or Bastrop, Texas, or wherever they happened to be making this amazing work. Before the internet, it's our mission, it's our responsibility as an institution to bring those people from the vaults and bring those people from the shadows and give them the platforms that they deserve. I think Ben Colwell is one of those artists, and I know you've done your due diligence here in Texas to get his work out, and we try to hang it on the wall and get the word out as much as possible ourselves over in New Orleans. Lowell Donk Collins was born in San Antonio but raised in Houston. Studied under Otis Dozier in Colorado, studied at the Glassell School, studied at the Art Students League in New York. When he came back to Houston, he taught at the Glassell School and retired as dean, where afterwards he opened his own gallery and school in Houston, and he was known as a dealer of pre-Columbian and African art, early dealer in that work out of the Houston area. He worked in both a regionalist style and a modernist style, and he was the father of contemporary artists that you may know today, Michael Roque Collins, also from Houston. When I was looking, I knew I wanted to bring one of these pieces into the collection. I was working with his son, Michael, to look at what might fit our collection. And I saw this piece and immediately recognized it as what we call flambeau. It had no title on it, but it's definitely a New Orleans scene. This doesn't happen in this way anywhere else. And he said, yeah, it is. Michael said, yeah, it is New Orleans. We always called it the fire dancers. I said, that's not fire dancers. These are flambeaux. So this watercolor is of when the parades, the Mardi Gras parades used to roll through the French Quarter at night. There were no street lights. So these guys had these gas lanterns, and they would light the way at night. And it was a tradition for a long time for people to throw nickels at their feet. They'll throw them back at you now if you do that. But this flambeau is from 1946, and it, again, image doesn't do it justice. The luminous quality of the watercolor, the economy of line on this piece is masterful. And so that's a recent acquisition. David Attucks, Coffee Pot, 1959. Such an honor to be able to meet him here in this room today. This is a gorgeous painting. Of course, y'all know that he's a painter. I don't think anyone else outside of Texas really understands what a great painter he is. We just know the monumental work, the monumental sculpture. But I want to clear something up. Is it true? Is he still here?
No.
No? Is it true that he studied under Leger?
Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah. So, student of Leger, probably the only student of Leger that we have at the collection of the Ogden. So, this is a beautiful, masterful piece by this artist. And tomorrow we're going to hear a lot about, so I'm not going to say anything. We're going to hear a lot about this artist tomorrow, which I'm really excited about. I was sitting behind Dr. Kim, and she was working on her PowerPoint, and I had no idea she created such beautiful, pure abstraction. I'm really excited about tomorrow's talk. This is the one and only piece in our collection by Corinne Mary Spillman, The Waiting Room from 1959, watercolor on paper. It's kind of this precisionist, modernist style. And again, we'll hear a lot more about this artist tomorrow. Hiram Williams, Three Nudes, 1959. This is very, very large painting. Another UT faculty member from 1954 to 1960, and with his very unique style of figurative expressionism. He eventually moved on to Florida as well, but I think was a strong voice in Austin for his time. And I'm putting Alexander Hogue, even though he's Dallas 9, I'm putting him here at the end because we kind of have an outlier in our collection. We don't have one of the great 1930s Dust Bowl paintings. We don't have one of the great late Big Ben paintings that are so amazing. So we'll welcome any of those if you have them. But what we do have is this 1961 abstraction called As Songs Singing, which is unusual, I think, in his production, but equally as successful. Cecil Casebeer, Highway to Junction, 1964. He was University of Southern California, but also University of Texas, Austin. And he was chairman of the Art Center of San Antonio. Highly charged color, beautiful surface, another road painting. And we'll move into contemporary art of Texas. Recent acquisition, Florence in the Morning. This was, Roger knew that I love Dorothy Hood, and especially after many conversations with the great Susie Khalil about both Hogue and Hood. And I was desperate to get a Hood in the collection. So he calls me over to the house one day to see what he'd bought recently. And I walked in and saw this. And I just looked at him. I said, you don't get to own this. This does not belong to you. I'll have paperwork for you in an hour because this has to come into the collection. So I didn't get it in an hour, but I got it in time for the Women in Southern Abstraction show that I was putting together, and we got to hang this piece right between Clyde Connell and Sherry Owens on a dark gray wall that was just stunning. John Alexander, one of the biggest names in American art to come out of Texas, contemporary art, I should say, along with James Surls, and we have a very early piece, 1972, this Untitled Landscape. I'm going to tell you that. I probably shouldn't tell you this. John didn't know we had this piece, and I hung it in a contemporary landscape gallery. And I walked John in when he was visiting one time, and he said, "No, where'd you get that?" I said, "Well, it was in Roger." And he dropped to his knees and he started sniffing the bottom edge. I said, "What are you doing, John?" "I bet it's still got cat piss on it." So he didn't remember painting it, but he remembered that Mr. Friend, his cat from that period in Houston art, had marked the painting. You can't smell it. You can't smell it. But we have, John is important to us at the Ogden. We have several pieces, large major pieces on long-term, hopefully permanent loan. We have several pieces in the collection of earlier works, and he just received our highest honor last year, the Opus Award. One of the first exhibitions I did at the Ogden Museum of Southern Art was John Alexander and Walter Anderson, One World, Two Artists, and we became fast friends, and he's been a crucial supporter of the Ogden's mission. Patrick Davis is an outsider artist from Houston. We have about 260 works of vernacular art in the collection that are really, really strong, and we have all of that hanging on the 5th floor, not all, most of it, hanging on the 5th floor of the Ogden Museum right now, including these 4 figures from Patrick Davis, who was actually born in Guyana and came to Houston. Normally you'd see these Patrick Davis pieces, they'd get to this point and then he would start collaging from magazines in these brightly colored kind of zoot suits that he would put on the figures. But Roger liked them naked, so we bought them unfinished, and I think they're much better in this state as well. Lowell Donk Collins' son, Michael Roque Collins, The Gathering, 1986-1998. This is a huge piece, and it was a gift from Betsy and Hughes Abel, who I believe are here in Texas. It's stunning surface, but you definitely see the influence of both John Alexander, of David Bates, of that contemporary landscape painting in Texas in the work. And it started in 1986 as a Houston skyline, and there was all kind of violence in the foreground. And then he slowly just reworked the entire surface to be the pleasure pools of Hadrian's Villa. And if you look in there, there's definitely these little skulls and creatures of the night peeking out around the surface of this painting. And it's really about, nature kind of overtaking and overcoming the works of man. Jim Roche, another artist who's connected with Texas. His home is Florida, and he's back in Florida and has been for a very long time. But he was part of the Oak Cliff 5 or the Oak Cliff 4, however you'd like to look at it, along with Jack Mims and George Green, Mac Whitney, and the great Bob Wade. This piece was made in 1970 here in Texas, and it was first shown in a clean, well-lit space, which was the kind of groundbreaking James Dickey gallery here in Texas. The next artist needs no explanation, Robert Rauschenberg, Man in the Moon. But what is interesting is this is signed for Roger. It was a gift to Roger from Robert Rauschenberg. Small piece. And the great Sharon Kopriva. In 2012, I curated an exhibition at the Ogden Museum called From Terra to Verde. That was a retrospective exhibition of Houston's Sharon Kopriva. This is one of the first pieces I'd ever seen. Saw it in a show in New Orleans, Helen's Gate, and it's really tragic narrative behind the piece. She was working on one of her typical Idaho landscapes because she spends summers in Idaho, and she was thinking about Bachland's Isle of the Dead, a lot during that time. and looking at that print often and images of the painting. And she got a phone call while she was working on the painting that a dear friend of hers, who was an educator, arts educator in Houston, and a big supporter of the arts in Houston, Helen Orman, had been randomly and unexpectedly murdered. She was washing her car at a car wash, and a man was off of his meds and was suffering from some mental illness, and thought that it was her mother, and he walked up to her and shot her. And it devastated Sharon. And she just put that white stripe right through the center of the composition, thinking about that Isle of the Dead painting and opening a gate for her friend Helen to pass through to the next world. And this was the first piece of Sharon's to come into the permanent collection. We have several now. And of course, James Surls and David Bradshaw. Cut hand, hurt eyes too. If you didn't notice it in the very first slide of the Gold Ring Hall, we have a very large Surls on our front plaza. It's the first thing you see when you walk up to the Ogden Museum of Southern Art. Me, knife, diamond, and flower. Well, this is in the vault, and it's been shown recently in an exhibition of the permanent collection of works on paper called Paper. But this piece has a really interesting story, and I wish James would tell it, but I'll do the best I can. James had created a print edition from this block earlier, and he had printed it in black. Is that correct, James?
So it was red.
It was red.
Different red.
Different red, different ink, different pressure. And the plate was left at the original print studio, and years later he returns and they say, "Oh, we still have your block." You know, they hadn't struck it. So he was working with, he wanted to do something with flatbed here in Austin, and he thought, man, I really love this block. You know, can we do it differently and do a different edition? And they decided, as long as it was clearly marked and understood that this was different color, different pressure, they were going to do a second edition. So they did. And then the second edition was shown at a museum exhibition. And a collector had a problem with it. So James didn't want to upset anybody. So he wanted to figure out how to make this edition completely different. So it was very clear that this wasn't a second printing of that edition. This was a completely different edition. And so the idea of involving David Bradshaw came in, who's a gun artist from Louisiana, explodes things, shoots things as part of his practice. So they got the entire edition together, and out in Splendora, Texas, Surls marked where he wanted the bullets to go, and Bradshaw shot holes exactly. I mean, he's a gun artist. He hit every mark exactly right. And it was the first time that through the entire edition, it struck the original block. It was the first time a printing block had been struck by a bullet. And I personally like this edition better than the original version of the piece, but we were very, very happy and very lucky to get this great print into the collection. And this is an artist you may not have heard of, but I'm very excited to involve in the Ogden's collection, Amita Bhatt. Amita Bhatt's from, originally from India, educated in Maryland Institute College of Art, which is also in our mission. But then she's been painting in Houston, Texas for over 25 years. And this is her masterpiece. I do believe it is her masterpiece, Desire, Desire. 52 by 64, great piece of contemporary imagism. And it's now part of the Ogden Museum's permanent collection. I think it really speaks to the diversity of a city like Houston. And talking about diversity, that's one of our main focuses, I believe. Not main focuses, what we look for in work to bring into the permanent collection, because as we discussed earlier, when you agree to bring in a piece to the permanent collection of a museum, it's like adopting a child. There's costs involved. We've never deaccessioned anything in our history. So you're promising to care for this thing into the future. So we're starting to get really picky about what we take. We want it to be the absolute best example of an artist's work, or we want it to be moments of innovation of movement in their vision. And on top of that, we're looking at the entire collection and thinking about equity within the collection and diversity. And I believe, in a city like Houston that's becoming one of the most diverse metropolitan cities in the world, that conversation is very important. So this Indian artist coming into the collection from Houston was very exciting for me. And one of the most recent acquisitions to the permanent collection is Sherry Owen's Mother Nature Throwing Up Her Hands from 2017. I first saw this piece in a beautiful exhibition at the Art Museum of Southeast Texas in Beaumont. Thank you very much. And I was floored. I was totally floored. I was very familiar with her work. I'd been to the studio, but I'd never seen something so fabulous as this coming out of her. And I love her work. I absolutely love her whole production. But this was the masterpiece. And so I started immediately working on trying. First, I just included it into the next show. And then once it was in the building, I could really work on getting somebody to help me bring this into the collection. And we did. So I'm very thrilled with that. And this is an artist who showed at every state museum in the state of Texas. You just don't get any more Texas than Sherry Owens. And you don't get a better Texas accent than Sherry Owens. So I'm just going to close it with a little pitch for it. These are the artists we're actually actively seeking. And one of those artists is right here in this room, Miss McCleary, which I think her work is just amazing. Mary McCleary, just amazing. It's so good. But yeah, so if you have any of these at home, you want to bring them on over to New Orleans, just come on down. So that's my shameless pitch at the end, and now we're open for questions.
Hey Bradley, in the beginning you mentioned that you acquired from Roger Ogden about 400 pieces.
A little over 600.
You built 4,000.
Around 4,000 right now.
And you also mentioned you don't have an acquisition.
0 acquisition budget.
Talk a little bit how a museum, and all museums are always under stress financially and so forth, from what I understand, maybe there's a few that aren't. But how do you acquire 3,400 pieces of art without an acquisition?
That's a good question. A lot of it, unfortunately, is from the kindness of the artists that wanted to be included in this collection. And as a curator myself, if there's something that I really, really think needs to be in the collection, I start going to board members, much to my director's chagrin, because he wants that money for operating. He wants money for taking care of this work that I'm bringing in the collection. But if there's something that's really important, I'll go to board members. I'll go to supporters of that person's art and say, we need to get this in the museum's collection. I think it's important for the museum. I think it's important for the artist. How can we go about making that happen? And sometimes it's a collaboration between a collector and the artist. Sometimes there's a piece of art that they really want to see in a museum collection. So if you buy this for the museum, I'll give you 10% off of that thing that you've really been wanting from me, kind of thing. And it's horse trading sometimes, But it's really the kindness and support of the artist, as well as our patrons, as well as people that support the mission of the museum. Now we're moving in the right direction financially, and we will have an acquisitions budget eventually. But we're a baby in the museum world. I mean, we opened in 2003, so we're still working on getting all of our buildings up and running and making sure we can take care of what we have. And then there's going to be that right patron that maybe endows a acquisitions budget. Who knows? But sometimes I'll work to find the right person to support that artist's work being included in a major museum collection. All right, thank you.